All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's daily devotional. All right. So, for our daily devotional today, I have some tidbits from an article that I'd like to read. But before I do want to, as I've done in the past, kind of put out a viewer discretion advised. It's not really graphic per se, but it's certainly it can bring up questions, and so we're talking about transgender and that type of thing a little bit. Not a whole lot, but just wanted to mention that before we get into it. If there's young children watching that you're not prepared to maybe have this discussion yet, you might want to have them maybe not watch or something like that. All right, so the article today is actually from an article that was published a while back. I say a while back; it's been a couple of weeks ago. It's an article describing J.K. Rowling, who most people know was the author behind the Harry Potter series. So J.K. Rowling she's known for very how best to put it, liberal views on things, and she's not really apologized for that and never has. And she has those views, and that's fine. She's entitled to those views. However, she posted something that got many people upset. And before I talk about specifically what she said, I want to talk a little bit about what the responses were. There were people who were very upset with J.K. Rowling based on what she said, and others suggested Rowling was ignorant in promoting a binary view of sex and gender. So, sex and gender to the modern world is the idea of assigned sex, which is male and female. The idea of having those particular body parts, if you will, when you're born. Whereas gender refers more to, again, in our modern definitions, gender refers more to the gender role, the identity of an individual. Okay, so this is how they respond to this. They said, "You're a smart person. How do you not yet understand the difference between sex and gender? The only way I can possibly explain your ignorance at this point is willfulness. It's incredibly disappointing." Rowling later tweeted that it was ridiculous for people to accuse her of hate. The idea that women like me, who've been empathetic to trans people for decades, feeling kinship because they're vulnerable in the same way as women, i.e. to male violence, hate trans people because they think sex is real and has lived consequences is a nonsense. So obviously what J.K. Rowling posted had to do with sex and gender, okay? This wasn't the first time Rowling caught flack for comments surrounding gender. Rowling spoke out in defense of Maya Forstater, who was fired from her job at a think tank after tweeting that she was surprised to see, quote, smart people she knew tying themselves in knots to avoid saying the truth that men cannot change into women. Dress how you please, however you please, Rowling said. Call yourself whatever you like. And then she refers to some lifestyle choices. Live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real. And she put the fact that she stood with the idea that men cannot change into women. Liberal groups like HRC as well as medical associations assert that gender is more complicated than Rowling suggested. Gender identity and assigned sex at birth can be different from one another, and that difference needs to be recognized in order to effectively guarantee access to care for transgender people. However, some, like Dr. Paul McHugh, disagree. Transgendered men do not become women, nor do transgendered women become men. All, including Bruce Jenner, become feminized men or masculinized women, counterfeits or impersonators of the sex with which they, quote, identify. In that lies their problematic future. So I actually appreciate that particular quote from Dr. McHugh. Because in the end, when you talk about these types of, whether you're talking about homosexuality, transgender, these types of things. And again, we talked a little bit about this with regard to the article about the was it the Baptist pastor in Canada who came out as transgender. Again, these are very problematic issues for our society. When it comes to the Bible, though, we know that God made Adam and Eve, Adam and Eve. All right. Also, we know that the idea not only of homosexuality is condemned, the sin of the act of homosexuality, but also pretending to be, deliberately pretending or trying to pass myself off as something other than the gender that I am. With as far as the Bible is concerned, sex and gender are really the same. Really, gender just kind of expounds on the idea of male or female. Where it's male, the idea of gender expands upon that to understand all that entails what God requires from males. For females is the same thing, especially when it comes to roles and relationships such as husbands and wives, fathers and mothers, public worship in worship services. So all of this leads us to the actual quote that J.K. Rowling, the thing that she said. And I'm not going to read all of this because some of it's just not necessary to read. But this is what it says. Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling faced another backlash Saturday after issuing a cheeky tweet on sex and gender that opened up a new chapter in her ongoing feud with LGBT advocates. And keep in mind, J.K. Rowling herself is a very, again, liberal-minded individual. She says if sex isn't real, which is to say that there isn't a definite male and female, okay, that's what she's describing, there is no same-sex attraction, Rowling tweeted to her 14 million followers. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased. I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex, male and female, removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. It isn't hate to speak the truth. So J.K. Rowling apparently draws a line. She believes in a binary representation of sex, which is to say you're either male or you're female. In terms of gender, her belief is you can choose to be whatever you want, but you're either born male or you're born female. So apparently there is a line that she draws, and that would seem to be supported by the other things that we just read. But what's interesting about this is the fact that the response that she's received. Notice the Human Rights Campaign, HRC. They claim that trans women are women, trans men are men, non-binary people are non-binary. I don't know how that works, but you know they're upset at them or at her. But the fact that she makes this statement, it isn't hate. Oh, and I just realized that y'all aren't seeing the same. Y'all aren't seeing the same thing I am. It just hit me that I didn't bring this up on the thing. I'm so sorry. I hope y'all were paying attention to what I was saying. But the fact that she makes the statement, it isn't hate to speak the truth. So it isn't hate to speak the truth, she says. And I think that's very interesting because that phrase really jumped out at me. In fact, that's what the title of the article published on June 6th. J.K. Rowling slammed for defending concept of biological sex. It isn't hate to speak the truth. Since when? Okay, this is interesting because this is an example of extreme liberal mentality kind of turning on itself. So those who are of a mind, especially those who have and stand for biblical principles and principles that God has established, have been accused of hate speech or in some form or fashion hating other people since all this really became a really openly discussed issue in the United States in the last 30 or 40 years. So people who are of a Christian persuasion are accused of hate regularly. And yet, now all of a sudden J.K. Rowling's the victim of this, and she says it isn't hate to speak the truth. And I think that's kind of an interesting response from her, because, and again, I'm not accusing her of hypocrisy or anything. She obviously draws a line somewhere. But it's interesting that because her line is drawn at there being male and female, and you can't just change that, okay? Just because you pass yourself off as female doesn't mean you're not still a male, okay, for those males who do so. It's an interesting concept, because we have a similar thing that is spoken by Paul. If you'll remember in the book of Galatians, let me get over here now. Again, I apologize for not having the article up. I thought I had it up, and apparently not. All right, Galatians chapter 4. So in Galatians chapter 4, Paul reminds the saints how much he labored with them, how much he loved them, and how the Galatians, of course, at this point have turned aside to false teaching, which was a combination, a hybrid version of the old law and the new law together. It was essentially all of the rituals of the old law and circumcision along with Jesus, in essence. But he goes on to say, see in verse 15, "What then was the blessing you enjoyed? For I bear witness that if possible you would have plucked out your own eyes and given them to me." And of course he's speaking about the relationship that exists between them. Verse 16, "Have I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth?" So Paul, as he's addressing the Galatians, he's jumping out ahead of any type of argument that, well, Paul doesn't like us, or Paul's being mean, or whatever they're going to say. And of course, Paul jumps out ahead of this by reminding them the relationship that exists between them. And he says, listen, all the stuff that we've been through together, and now all of a sudden I tell you the truth and you get upset about it. Does that mean that I've become your enemy because I'm telling you what you need to hear? All right. That principle is something that is very important for us, because just as this point that is made here, it isn't hate to speak the truth. Just because we stand for the truth, obviously for those who are Christians, doesn't mean that we hate people. And it makes all of Christianity look bad when you have individuals who are running around picketing and holding signs saying God hates gays and things like that. That's awful. God doesn't hate gay people. God doesn't hate transgendered people. He loves all people. What he hates are the evil deeds that people do. And those types of deeds certainly are the types of actions and conduct and lifestyle choices that are going to end up in condemnation. And that's what we learn in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. But the broader concept here of understanding that when we stand for the truth, that it doesn't mean that we hate other people. And really what it boils down to from those on the other side of this who are accusing, well, you're just speaking hate. Really what it is it's not that you want, it's really a desire for people to not just, well, you have to live with this fact. It's, I want you to approve of this. Okay? People don't like not only being condemned in the minds of others or believed to be going to hell or whatever, but they want to be accepted in terms of approved by everyone. And in many ways, the actions that they take, the words that they use, are an effort to try to force people to approve of them, to justify their conduct, to justify their lifestyles. And ultimately, as Christians, as people desiring to be pleasing to God, we can't shirk from standing up for the truth. That doesn't mean we should be going around picketing and holding signs saying that God hates gays. That's not the right way to go about it, and certainly it's not true. But it is important for us to stand for the truth and to recognize that these types of sexual lifestyle choices, God is going to condemn. That's what the Bible teaches. Now, if people are going to be of the opinion or the persuasion, well, God's going to change his mind in judgment, well, then we can just throw out the entire Bible. Okay, if you believe that God has in any way shown himself to be inconsistent in the Old and New Testaments, that he just whimsically and randomly changes his mind on things, on what's sin and what's not, then we might as well just throw out the Bible. But the fact is, God has consistently applied the standard of right and wrong, both in the Old Testament under the patriarchal law, the Mosaic law, and now under the law of Christ. And of course, keep in mind, we will stand before the judgment seat of Christ, and we will be judged for how we've lived and for whether or not we've stood for the truth. And certainly Paul, this is one of the points that Paul brings out to the Galatians, that listen, I'm telling you what you need to hear. I'm telling you the truth. So this isn't hate, and certainly I'm not trying to be your enemy. But do you view me as your enemy simply because I'm telling you what you need to hear for the good of your soul? And notice the diplomacy on Paul's end, that he emphasized the relationship that he has with those brethren, and the fact that I proved how much I loved you. So does that now all of a sudden, because I'm saying something you don't want to hear, does that therefore all of a sudden change the intent or the understanding that I care for you, and that I obviously care for your souls, otherwise he wouldn't be saying anything. So anyway, that's the daily devotional for you today. Just something to think about, not only from the application of the idea of male and female, both the physical characteristics being binary, male and female, but also and the associated gender aspects as well, but also from the aspect that speaking the truth actually shows that we care. If we don't care about souls, if we don't care about other people or their eternal judgment, then we're not going to say anything. Okay, we won't bring anything up ever. But that's kind of where that hymn that we often sing, "You Never Mentioned Him to Me," sometimes really hits us in the feels, so to speak, because it reminds us that, no matter how much we may like an individual or appreciate our neighbor or whatever, if we don't actually take the opportunity to talk to somebody about the gospel or to invite them to worship or something, that it's hard to say that we love their soul. So anyway, I hope that's something that's beneficial for you, and hope that's something we can take with us and remind ourselves to talk to people about the gospel. All right, so keep in mind, no live stream tomorrow. We'll pick up Sunday at 10 a.m. for our for our members. 10 a.m. we will have worship at the building. Obviously, we'll have a live stream for that for our members, and then at 1 p.m. We'll have our regular Sunday live stream with our Bible study in 1 Timothy chapter 5, and sermon and some hymns as well. All right, everybody. Thank you. Y'all have a good weekend. Lord willing, I'll see you Sunday.